Welcome to the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, wife, mother of two and devoted homemaker. Join me on this journey as we explore the beauty of slow and simple living, where life unfolds at its own unhurried pace. I'll take you through my experiences of slowing down, tending to our allotment plot, finding joy in the little things and making the most of our small home. Together we'll learn to live in harmony with the ever-changing seasons, discovering the magic that lies in embracing the present moment. So let's embark on this enriching adventure towards a more intentional and fulfilling life. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, your host for this whole podcast, and today we are diving into one of my absolute favourite topics: growing your own food even when your space is limited. Now, I know absolutely firsthand that you do not need a huge garden, you don't need some picture perfect Instagram homestead, or you don't even need like loads and loads of space to grow fresh, delicious produce. Now listen, right? I said I know firsthand, and I really do, because I spent 5 years exclusively gardening on my balcony before I even got my allotment. And even now, my balcony is still a thing. Like, I've got all of this space at the allotment. Surely I don't garden on my balcony anymore and I take things slow. You'd think so, right? Because I have plenty to do at the allotment. But actually, what tends to happen is both spots are thriving and I cram in as much on my balcony as I possibly could. In fact, this year I even feel like I'm going bigger and better than any of the previous years, even when I gardened exclusively there. So that's just the level of excitement I get from gardening in a small space. And I think what it is, because obviously gardening in a small space was something that I did for, like I said, 5 years. And then it was probably year 4 of that when I then applied for the allotment. And so you might be thinking, like, obviously you applied for the allotment so you could have more space and do more. And that's true to some extent. It's true in the sense that what I wanted was, I guess, more space to pull away from using supermarkets, to get more in touch with nature. And I think the main thing really as well is that I really just wanted to do a bit more en masse and have that space where it's not just about our being outside or growing. It's also about things like our home education with the children and just having that space. But the balcony is incredible, and it's probably what excites me most. Like, I love my allotment, don't get me wrong, but there is something I really, really enjoy about gardening on the balcony, and I think it comes down to actually seeing the space thrive in what normally wouldn't be a growing space, I guess. I like the challenge. I like to see what I can do, what I can fit in, how I can make it work. I get a lot of joy from that, and I think that's a lot of what it is. It's just that challenge of, what can I do here? What can I try? What isn't really the norm here? Like, shall I do parsnips this year and see how they go? All sorts of things. So parsnips is funny I mentioned it. It's actually one of the few things that I have never tried on the balcony, and I think because they have quite a long root tap is probably something, unless I had a really deep bin maybe, but I probably wouldn't have the space for that, and it's very easy for me to just plant them at the allotment. And I suppose that's the fun of having both places, is I can actually be more specific now. But I'm going to tell you throughout this episode how gardening on the balcony has looked for me. If you only have a small space, whether that be a balcony, a windowsill, a small garden, a patio garden, just think, if it's a small space, there is still so much you can do with it. And I have experimented with just about everything from herbs, brassicas, greens, lettuce, tomatoes, strawberries. I've done potatoes in containers. I did beetroot and radishes one year, and honestly, everything really works. So, like I said, I probably wouldn't try parsnips, but that's just because I don't have to. So maybe if you have a small space and you want to try them, they need depth, but go ahead, give it a try. And that is pretty much my mantra in gardening on the balcony. I remember the year that I was going to do beetroot on the balcony, and I was like, oh, is that going to work? Because obviously, they're a root veg and, they can get quite big. Is a pot going to be enough for them? And do you know what? I didn't think it would work, and it did. Of course, I didn't have rows and rows of beetroot, but, I still had, I think I had about 6 to 8 beetroot that year. And yeah, they do grow a bit bigger in the ground at the allotment, I've noticed since. But do you know what? They still work. They were still beetroot. I still made stuff out of them. And let me tell you, that is probably the biggest win and the biggest joy. And I think, just giving it a go, actually, and it's the same theory I have at the allotment as well. I stand there, seed packet turned over. Oh, this should have been planted in whenever. Shall I just do it? Shall I just give it a go? And yes is often the answer. And does it usually work? Yes, it does. Because nature is designed to nature. And at a certain point, you can't stop it doing what it wants to do. So small space gardening is so much fun. It's so possible for you to grow a really thriving, abundant garden on a balcony, a windowsill, a small space patio, whatever that looks like. So if you are someone who has those things, or maybe you just want to hear what I do, then this episode is for you. So I want to talk to you today about why small space gardening is so exciting, totally worth it, and arguably much more exciting than gardening in a larger space. That's a hill I'm kind of prepared to die on. I'm going to tell you the best containers for your plants that I found work on my balcony, the easiest and most rewarding veggies and herbs to grow in a small space, common mistakes and how you can avoid them, and just creative gardening tips for a small space. Plus, I'm going to probably do a little frequently asked questions right at the end. So yeah, let's dive into it. Because like I said, small space gardening is so worth it. It is so much fun. Now, before we get into all the nitty gritty about how to do it, let's talk about why gardening in a small space is such a great idea. So if you have a balcony like me, or a very small garden, patio, etc., first and foremost, it is super convenient, right? And if you're listening to this and you have a bigger garden, you know what I mean. It's super convenient. You can step out onto your balcony, into your garden, onto your patio, and you can be, cutting some fresh basil to put in your dinner, or grabbing a handful of tomatoes straight from the vine. There is no need to run out to the supermarket or, whatever. You have fresh produce right at your fingertips. And secondly, it is surprisingly productive. Now, you might be thinking that a few pots or planters can't produce much, not compared to what you're going to plant in the ground. But you would be so amazed at how much food you can grow in a tiny space. And if you want to follow along with me, I am pretty much documenting this year. I sort of had this feeling. I had this idea that this year I really wanted to go bigger and bolder and better on the balcony. And a lot of that comes from, I haven't really been able to use my balcony to its full capacity for the last few years, which I'm so grateful in hindsight that I've had the allotment because of that. But also, I have had to have building work on the outside of my building, and it did mean that I was sort of left without any sort of living space outside on my balcony for a lot of the season last year. So we had scaffolding went up in March and it wasn't taken down till the end of June, which kept it pretty shaded, and then I had to put it back together because I have like nice flooring, I have trellis, I have nice pots, and all of that I had to store away during that time. So I feel like last spring and summer on the balcony were sort of short, and I think maybe that made me feel like this year, let's enjoy the space. I've had my cladding done. The outside of my home is insulated and looking beautiful with its white cladding on. I've actually also just had my windows and patio doors redone, so it feels like a fresh start. It does feel like a fresh start on the balcony. And so, I've been sort of gearing up on my balcony for a little bit, and now it's looking good. It's still in the early throes. Obviously, spring has only just really started. But I'm pretty much going to document this year what I'm growing, how I'm growing it, how I've got things set up, what pots I'm using. And so come follow me over on either Instagram or TikTok. I'm the Slow Living Collective in either space. And I'm just going to be sharing why small space gardening is so much fun. And like I said, it's surprisingly productive, and you can grow a lot of food in a tiny space, especially when you've got the right setup. And I guess the last point really is that actually gardening in a small space, I find it a fantastic fun challenge, and it's so satisfying because there is something so rewarding about growing food anyway. But I just think there's something extra when you're growing in a small space because it's almost like you shouldn't be doing it. There's not enough space for it, but you just have to be creative in your thinking and make it happen. And I completely love that idea. So let's dive into the how. So let's talk containers, because that's how we're growing. It is container gardening. But if you think about it, you can do container gardening in a bigger space. If you are using sort of like a raised bed sort of model, that is arguably a bit like container gardening. So it's just about figuring out what space you have. And I think one of the biggest myths about small space gardening is that you need to have really fancy or expensive pots. Which you don't. So, as long as it has good drainage. But you also need to think about, particularly if you're on a balcony, not watering your neighbours' heads. So I am on the second floor in my block, and I particularly remember it was during the pandemic. I think it was either the summer of 2020 or 2021. And I remember I remember going outside and thinking, oh, I must water my pots, like really hot, dead of summer, potentially a heat wave. I just remember it being super warm. And I remember going out onto the balcony and thinking, I must water before I go in. It was dark. I can't remember what part of the summer it was, but it was already dark, and I thought I best water my plants before I go into bed. And so I went out, watered my plants, and then the pots started dripping out. The pots I have all have like bottoms on them, so they're not supposed to overflow. But I'm like, maybe I guess I watered them too much and they did overflow, and then they dripped off the balcony and dripped down onto my neighbour's head. I heard them go, ah! And I was thinking, I never moved so quickly to get back inside and shut that door. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. But yeah, so I think probably, yes, you need drainage, because I do have a few pots that don't have drainage. And while they do work, something I need to remind myself of is when the summer season has ended and the plants have died, or, I've harvested whatever I've put in there, I must get rid of the soil and basically or store the pot, because I often will use my old compost from the previous year as like a base, and then mix it with some new compost, and it just makes it go further, and it works, right? It really does work. So what happens when you don't have drainage is it can get pretty wet, which is why you want to maybe leave it slightly on the drier side so it's not soggy. If it rains and there's no drainage, the water just fills up, so you need to be mindful about that. So I need to remember to get rid of it, because I recently got my husband to take these stinky pots out that I hadn't bothered to clean, and they were filled with last year's soil, and they had gotten very, very wet in the rain over the winter, and they weren't looking or smelling good at all. I guess one of the good things about a balcony is, you do need the drainage, but you can also just buy, like those saucers, or the long trays, things like that, just to make sure that everything sort of isn't overflowing and isn't dripping everywhere, and that's probably something I need to remind myself of. I need to buy some saucers and do better at that. But here are some things that I have. So like I said, you don't need massive, fancy or expensive pots. And then I'm going to go on and tell you that some of the pots I have, they have been pricey, but I've accumulated them over time. I've been given them as gifts, and, there are lots of places that you can purchase similar ones. So I actually use the Ello brand. I don't know how to spell it, just so you know. I think it's EHLO. Is that right? ELHO brand, Elho. I don't know how it's pronounced. They're beautiful though, because they're really colourful, and I really, really like that, because I like to make my balcony colourful and bright, and I've got a mixture of stuff. Now, if you guys have been long time listeners, I lost my granddad last year, and he had a beautiful small patio garden. Again, he did so much in a small space. And actually, just as I'm saying it, I'm now wondering, like, how much influence did that have? Like, my nan and granddad lived in a small bungalow with a really small sort of patio garden, but he actually had, consider it was a small patio garden, he actually did loads. And I've never tied the two things together, because obviously I am equally passionate about doing lots, but I wouldn't say he was sort of like passionate about doing lots in a small space. He just got on with doing lots in a small space, because he came when he moved into his bungalow with my nan. They actually came from a bigger house where he had a really big garden, which he really loved. And so, I don't know if those two things are connected, but he did lots in a small space. But when we moved his stuff, after he passed away, he had so many like pots and all sorts. I mean, I took everything from his garden, not because I was being like a magpie, but because I just wanted it to live on, and I didn't want it to just be like that's the end of it. I even took a piece of trellis, and in a last ditch attempt, I don't know why I did that at all, but I inherited like a lot of his pots, And so, I'm very lucky there, because pots are actually, if you're buying a lot, it can be quite expensive. But like I said, I use, over the years, I have bought the Elo brand ones, and I really like them because they specifically do balcony ones, and they are fantastic. I actually have their old style balcony, like hanging ones, which, I don't think you can. I'm just looking on their website literally while I'm talking, because I don't think they actually do the exact ones that I have anymore. But they do still do the hang. Okay, like they do still do the hanging pots. So I actually have the 3 style hanging pots. So like space for 3. I don't know, 3, not necessarily 3 plants, but it's like 3 pots joined together essentially. They don't do that one anymore, but they do the single ones, and their pot prices, the hanging ones for an individual pot, is from $5.99. This isn't a sales pitch, by the way, but I'm just sharing. And they actually do the larger ones for $9.49. But like I said, I've collected them over the years, and it's taken me a long time to get all of those. But also as well, through the years where I've got them, they work perfectly because they've got the hanging part that hangs over the balcony, and I actually utilise the space kind of double. I have them on one side to like on the inside of the balcony, but I also have them on the outside of the balcony as well, so I have them sort of hanging over the edge. So I always put things like my strawberries over the edge, because they don't require me to notice them all the time, and it's good. The strawberries will just hang. They work really well because they're sort of like a tumbling kind of thing. I'm also probably going to do some tumbling tomatoes out there. I started some early tomatoes, so we'll see how they go. But I plan to do lots of tomatoes this year, balcony and allotment. So yeah, you can get those hanging pots. There are replicas everywhere, places like B&M, Home Bargains, Pound Stretcher. We've got a Pound Stretcher where we live. They're really good as well. Like I said, I've got a lot of their low brand ones, but they're, you can get lots of different ones in different places, and they're really good, because one of the things about small space gardening, particularly on a balcony, but everywhere I suppose as well, is you need to use the vertical height. And I just got from my mum, she had one. She had also, I think from the same brand, but they have like a metal hanger, and the hooks, they're quite thin, and so I'm able to like multi-stack, have different levels. So I've got like a planter on the floor, then I've got the thinner hooks because they go through the smaller part of my balcony, and then I've got the bigger ones with the bigger hooks that go over the top part of the balcony. And it does just make for sort of like essentially 3 levels of growing. You have to be mindful, is everything going to get enough sunlight, etc., etc. But I will put some pictures of what my balcony looks like. I also purchased this year like a plant stand for the end of my balcony, which has lots of different shelves on it. I will share all of that over on the show notes for this episode, because there's lots of good things in there. But when it comes to pots as well, if you're just going to have like pots on the ground as well, or if you have sort of, I don't know what you would call it, like I don't know, like basically like a hanger. So basically the Elo brand ones, you can actually just buy the individual trough hanger if you want, and then that's like a support, and then you can buy the trough or pots separately, things like that. You can use those, but you can just use regular pots as well. So terracotta pots or plastic pots are good. They're great for, a lot of stuff. I have a really nice terracotta pot that I put my mint in. I've also got a couple of terracotta pots I've got some rosemary that I grew from last year in. So yeah, terracotta pots, plastic pots, they are great for everything. The hanging things, if you're on a balcony, they're great. So some with a thick hangers, thin hangers, it depends what your balcony is constructed of as well. But like I said, over on Substack in the show notes, I will share pictures and links of everything that I have. You can also utilise what you've got. So if you've got old buckets, you can just drill some holes in the bottom and, use those. You can recycle old things that you've got. You can grow in so many things. Like I said, vertical planters, hanging baskets, hanging pots, everything that's utilizing that vertical space is just perfect when you're growing in a small space, because if you can maximize it, it's perfect. And especially with the hanging pots as well, so many different tumbling varieties of things like tomatoes, strawberries are great for that. Like I said, herbs can do that. So yeah, fantastic. And when it comes to pots, bigger is often better, because larger containers hold the moisture better and they just give plants just better space to grow. So what are the best veggies or herbs for small spaces? So let's talk about what to grow, because some plants do naturally do better in containers than others. So if you're just getting started, maybe these are some things to try. So when it comes to herb, things like basil, mint, parsley, thyme, chives, they're all really easy and they thrive in pots. I love growing chives in pots. I love that because they tumble. I always do mint. Mint is good in pots because if you plant it in the ground, it will just go wild and you'll never see the end of it. I also like oregano. I've got oregano in pots. Rosemary as well. I've got some rosemary that I love. So yeah, all of those things, and it's nice to grow those things because they're very easy. You could dry them out, you can just go and cut off a bit and use it on your dinner, and that's what I love about the summer, and that's why I love growing herbs on the balcony. I can just go outside, trim something, go inside and go and cook with it, and that's about as fresh as it comes. Also, things I love growing on the balcony. So my balcony is southwest facing, so it does get a lot of sun and it gets very, very hot in the summer. Peppers thrive there. I don't ever grow my peppers from seeds. I'm not that successful with peppers from seed, but I always buy some pepper plants, so I will do that this year as well. Always grow, probably will just grow a sweet pepper and then some chili peppers as well. But yeah, lettuce always does well. Spinach. This year I'm going to do some black kale, which I did in the ground last year, so I'm interested to see how it does. I'm going to do it in a big planter this year, and I'm really curious to see how it does, because obviously anything part of the brassica family always gets obliterated by pests, and I garden organically and I do my very best, but it is difficult growing brassicas, and so I decided this year that actually I was going to try that up on my balcony instead, which is a lot less pesty, let's say. Tomatoes are also great. I mix it up, tumbling varieties. I also do more bushier ones, cherry tomatoes. I did the really tiny ones last year, which I loved. Root veggies, you'll be surprised, but carrots work well, beetroot, radishes, and also garlic and onions are really low maintenance and great for small spaces too. And if you are feeling adventurous, you can also do potatoes in grow bags. I am also going to do this year, which I've not done on the balcony before, I'm going to grow peas. I've already got them out, an early variety of peas. And I'm also going to do some beans climbing up the trellis. So that'll be fun. It's a bit early for beans at the moment, but I've got my peas growing. I've got some peas planted out. I intend to do quite a lot there. I think that's it. That's the excitement. I really do enjoy just giving it a try and seeing if it works, and just hopeful that it does work. So before we end today's episode as well, I want to address some common mistakes how to avoid them, what I've learned growing on the balcony. Containers dry out really fast. They dry out faster than garden beds, so make sure you're watering frequently in hot weather. If you can get self-watering pots, that's great, but you can also purchase things that sort of keep the soil moist. They're like kind of like balls that you fill with water on essentially like a straw, and you fill it up and then put it in, and it will just slowly water the plant. I'm going to try and get some of them this year, because obviously when I go on holiday, I always go on holiday in the summer. It's always it's lucky, but it is always usually quite warm. And so I spend all week worrying about my plants. But something I always do is, before I go away, I've actually got like a balcony shade, and I used to use it when the kids were very, very little, just to provide a bit more shade out there. It basically fits around the edge of the balcony, and I usually fix that before I go on holiday, and then I stand all of my pots down on the floor. Just shades them a bit better and hopefully helps them out. I've never had a problem. I've never come back and anything's like dead. There's some things that sort of need a bit of attention sometimes, but they generally do okay. But it's just because the containers, they do dry out faster. Now, soil as well. Obviously at the allotment I'm planting like straight into the ground, but at home that kind of soil is far too dense to use in pots, so I use a compost. I use a peat-free compost, and that works fine. Never had a problem with that. Also have to be mindful when you're setting up a balcony like I do, especially because I've got pots all over the place and some are shading others, and just working out what needs sun and what can thrive in partial shade. So a lot of the herbs can thrive in partial shade, so I just basically place things so it gives them the best shot. And so also just be mindful, like, what does your space look like? Like I said, mine is a southwest facing balcony. It is hot. It is really, really hot, so especially in the second half of the day. So yeah, I just be mindful about what you're planting and where you're planting it, and how the sun falls on it, I guess. And I guess the last thing is just being mindful about how you're planting and where you're planting. I don't pay any attention to spacing. I throw it in if it usually lives. Like, I'm not measuring distance between. It's all going in. Let's give it a try is pretty much my plan. So I guess my biggest tips when it comes to gardening in a small space is use your vertical space, repurpose your containers, collect your rainwater if possible. I actually have like a lot of trays that I actually put out to collect rainwater, so that's really great. I often do that over watering properly, like from the tap, walking back and forth with to my tap, even though it's not that far. Always seems too much, but yeah, I always enjoy collecting the rainwater. And also as well, you can do companion planting too, because that often helps. I do companion planting both on the balcony and at the allotment as well. So I think that's pretty much everything. I wanted to try and get as much in as possible and just give you a lot of facts. So that was probably quite an intense episode, but I really hope it's inspired you to either start or expand your small space garden. I hope it showed you that even the tiniest space can be turned into an amazing little garden. So if you ever want to dive deeper into small space homesteading, go check out my small space homesteading bundle, because it is packed with so many resources to help you grow food no matter where you live, no matter what your space is like. So you can find that on my Stan store. That's stan.store/The Slow Living Collective. stan.store/The Slow Living Collective. I will obviously put all of the links in the show notes for everything that I mentioned in this episode. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you guys so much for listening. You can find me as always over on the Slow Living Collective on Substack. That's the slowlivingcollective.substack.com. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at the Slow Living Collective there. And yeah, thank you guys so much for listening, and I will catch you in my next episode.